Thank you for joining us today for the Korean Studies Seminar Series. So let me quickly introduce about the series and myself. My name is Dr. Hoyun Ko. I'm an assistant professor at the PSIR department here at Nazarbayev University. So the series is organized and presented by uh, the Korean Studies Center at Nazarbayev University. So for those who are not aware or have not heard of the center, so the center was first established in 2019, so it's been a year. And the center is housed in the School of Sciences and Humanities, SSH. But back then when it was first recognized, it was in SHSS. So it was funded by the Academy of Korean Studies in South Korea. And we have multiple faculty members from different departments and schools. And we are working together on topics about Korea, including politics, economy, culture, languages, and foreign policies. So for now, we have about 6 faculty members from Poli-Sci department, Econ department, linguistics, languages, and public policy schools. Um, Today we have a special guest from South Korea who's going to present a very interesting topic about corruption and human rights abuses, as you have seen from our promotion email. Dr. SUH Jiwon, she is associate professor at Changwon National University in South Korea. And she specializes transitional justice, identity politics, and Southeast Asia. Here, her previous works usually focus on human rights issues and justice in Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia. And upon our request, she kindly accepted our request for presenting her research through online. I know it's a bit challenging and difficult to do everything online, but I hope this time deserve then pays off for everyone us today. So the title of her talk today is Settling the Past Accounts of Human Rights Abuses and Corruption, Conflicting or Not, Evidence from 3 Asian Democracies. So I know most of attendees today are interested in Korea, so I think she may have something to say about Korea, about the transitional justice. And also some of you are interested in historical memory and dealing with the past under the present political regime and political orders. So that might be also interesting to some of you. So let me just quickly say a little about the organization of today's online session. So we're going to first let Dr. SUH Jiwon present her research. So during the presentation, please turn off your audio so everyone can stay focused and pay attention and hear clearly without any interruption. But please keep your videos on, so it's kind of showing our respect and welcome to our guest speaker. So I don't want to leave her alone in the dark, black virtual room. So please leave your video on. And also, if you have any questions, you can leave your question on the chat to everyone. She may not get back to your question immediately, but after the presentation, we will have a discussion time. So during the time, you can ask a question through chat, or you can either raise your hands physically or virtually. Then I will call out your name. Then you can unmute yourself and you can speak to the presenter. Okay, so I think we have a pretty many people coming in. Okay, so if your connection is unstable or getting slower, feel free to go out and rejoin again, but make sure that you're muted when you rejoin so we don't get any noise, background sound to interrupt the presentations. Okay, so without further ado, I will pass it to Dr. Sajiwan. Thank you for today, for your time, and then it is all yours.
Hey, thank you very much, Professor Go, for introducing me and also for giving me this very privileged opportunity to share my research with the academic community at Nazarbayev University and also the students from the university. Do you know where Changwon is? Changwon is if you go to Seoul Station in Seoul and take express train for 3 hours, you can get to Changwon. Uh, I'm working at the Department of International Relations, and we have students from Uzbekistan, a few, and this year we have an applicant from Kyrgyzstan, but not yet a student from Kazakhstan. So it's very precious opportunity for me to talk to students from different backgrounds. Um, well, a little bit of backgrounds to this research. I wrote my PhD dissertation on post-Suharto Indonesian transitional justice. It was back in 2012. So I have worked on this topic since I think 2008. So this work was born out of a Korean perspective on Indonesian transitional justice, or what I thought a bit weird. And why do Indonesians think that way and not this way as Koreans uh, do? And so I began to collect my data from newspapers in 2000, actually 10, and I also did to collect newspaper articles on corruption trials in Indonesia in 2013. And then in 2018, I got NRF funding, National Research Foundation funding for the topic. And I could visit the Philippines and interview people there. And so I have a completed manuscript now, and which is now under review. So any comments on um, the presentation will be appreciated, because I'm sure that this manuscript will not be accepted as it is now. And so a bit of backgrounds or major characters. This is Mr. Suharto and his wife, Ibu Tien. I think it was in the 1970s. They took this picture with the king and the queen of the Netherlands, which was a former colonizer of Indonesia. Suharto was known as a smiling general, so smiling always, but he was not very kind to the people, who opposed him, or people who were on the periphery, people who thought were people whom he thought were unnecessary to this society. And on the other hand, he was known as a family guy. So he was very loyal to his wife, unlike some other Indonesian guys. So he really loved his family and friends. So together they amassed a large fortune, you know, out of the business deals and everything. And this is Mr. Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines and his wife, the famous Imelda Marcos. Mr. Ferdinand Marcos was elected to president twice, but he declared martial law in 1972. And then it was the beginning of the authoritarian rule for 14 years. These are the former Korean presidents who were known as dictators. The President Park Chung-hee was elect just like Marcos was first elected to president, and then turned his rule into a more authoritarian rule afterward. And President Chun Doo-hwan was in power from 1980 to 1987. He was a president when I was very young. So authoritarian legacies in three Asian democracies. Um, Mr. Suharto was president of Indonesia from 1966 to 1998. Almost 1966, I would say, because he formally became a president in 1968, but was already in power from the March of 1966. And there were some well-known events of human rights abuses under his rule. The first was anti-communist purge of 1965 to 1966. Um, in this purge, when Suharto was not in full control, but he and the military was in control of this purge and the massacre. 500,000 people were killed by the military itself and also its allies in the social organizations. And also Suharto and his military invaded East Timor in 1975. And during the 24-year rule in Indonesian occupation in East Timor, more than 100,000 people were sacrificed because of the killing and hunger and everything. And there were also like separatist conflicts in Indonesian regions of Aceh and Papua. For people in Aceh and Papua, these are nationalist conflicts, not separatist conflicts. But from the viewpoint of Indonesia, they are separatist conflicts. And so there were also killings and torturings of civilians in these regions and etc. There were like opposition activists or criminals who were sacrificed under his regime. And during the Ferdinand Marcos rule, there were also many cases of human rights abuses. It was said that the opposition activists were salvaged during his rule. The salvaging means torturing, mutilating, and dumping on a roadside for public display. So over some hundreds of opposition activists were killed in this way. And also in Korea, uh, during and before the formal rule of the General Chun Doo-hwan began, there were the May uprising in Gwangju in 1980, where over 200, people were killed. And there were also other cases of human rights abuses like fabricated spies and etc. Well, but before President John's rule during the Korean War, from the period of Korean War, there were lots of there were a series of human rights abuses in Korea, which began from the killing of 500,000 people by both sides in Korean War. And aside from human rights abuses, the dictators were very notorious for their corruption. So this was the 2004 article on the Indonesian and the Philippine dictators and their wealth. So Transparency Indonesia, Transparency International, an anti-corruption NGO, estimated that Suharto embezzled between $15 billion, 15 to $35 billion. So he was like number one. And the second was Marcos, who was estimated to have stolen between 5 billion to 10 billion US dollars. And then comes Mobutu, comes Nigeria, Serbia, Milosevic, Haiti, Peru, Fujimori. Well, John's name is not there, but this case of South Korea can be still examined with two other countries because although it was not on the global list, the human rights abuses and corruption under its former dictators were treated very seriously after the transition. So human rights and corruption in post-authoritarian justice. I have some questions and arguments. Well, after several decades, still making policy choices over past wrongs is a significant problem for political elites and also for the society. So should we put perpetrators on trial? How many? Only a few elites, or all those low-ranking officers and soldiers? And should we build a truth commission which investigates the human rights abuses under the regime, or should we just build a reconciliation commission or truth and reconciliation commission? And should we purge the officials of the previous regime out of the government, or should we refrain from doing that? Or should the government provide reparations to the victims? How much? Lastly, um, should the government provide an apology, the state apology to the victims? So there are so many things to think about. So which policy choices is one question for the elites. But for me, as a researcher, what I was curious was, does timing of transition matter for making these questions? Because I thought maybe specialization or sophistication of international norms over these issues for transitional justice. And this occurred from the early 1990s and not before that. Maybe this will lead to separation of human rights and corruption as authoritarian legacies. And maybe this will have some impacts on how things are done after the transition. Some observers see human rights and corruption as two different issues competing and conflicting with each other. Well, actually, the Indonesian human rights activists whom I interviewed had this view. They were like, oh, now it's corruption. It's only about corruption, and when does our time come? Things like that. And also, among the literature, I found out a book on the Arab Spring. So after the Arab Spring, many Arab leaders were put on trial with corruption charges. And there was one scholar who criticized this because she thought that corruption trials are just like scapegoating and the corruption trials just hinder quest for justice, because corruption is for her not very important. Human rights abuses matter, but because all people only focus on corruption, the human rights abuses are being forgotten. So the focus on corruption is a problem. But I don't think so. And I argue that when the two issues are explored together, I think more opportunities can be provided for both to be highlighted and prioritized rather than forgotten. And also, I think sophistication and specialization of norms, international norms, may hinder the emergence of measures for the two issues to be treated in integrated or interrelated ways. Okay, these are two Latin American former heads of state who were charged with both corruption and human rights abuses. I was actually in Lima in 2008 watching Fujimori trial on TV, and maybe this trip to Peru has some impact on my research right now. Anyway, two very infamous Latin American leaders, Fujimori and Pinochet, were also prosecuted for both issues. And there are a few works on this phenomenon in Latin American studies, but a lot overall, the research works on Asian transitional justice are not so many. There are only a few works on Asian transitional justice out there, and especially there is, as far as I know, almost no work on the post-authoritarian corruption issue in Indonesia and Korea. There are a few works on the Philippines, so I just tried to compare these three countries. provide also some basic data on the trajectories of transitional justice and corruption trials in these countries. So there are possible ways of integrating two issues, corruption and human rights abuses, during the course of transitional justice. One is just to simply prosecuting the people with both charges, corruption charges and human rights charges, which were realized in Peru, Chile, and South Korea also. And as in the Philippines, part of the recovered ill-gotten assets of the former dictators and their families can be provided as reparations for victims of abuses. Or one can put the economic crimes in the mandates of truth commissions for investigation of abuses during the former regimes. There are many African truth commissions that did this in Chad, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Kenya, and also South Korean commission did this, though it was not about kleptocracy. It was about labor rights and other issues. Well, in general, the scholars found out that corruption actually have stronger delegitimization effects. The public usually cares more about corruption than human rights abuses. So in the Philippines and Korea, the early democratizers, early democratizers, corruption played a facilitating role in transitional justice. In Indonesia, two issues went separate ways. And we can compare these two groups, Philippines and Korea on the one side and Indonesia on the other side. In the Philippines and Korea, there was a recognition of abuses and almost state apology to the victims. But this did not have not occurred in the later in the Indonesia yet. So my argument is pursuing any justice over corruption or justice over human rights abuses. Pursuing any justice can help overcome authoritarian legacies as a whole by creating more opportunities for other issues to be discussed and managed. Yes, this from my research trip to Manila. On the left is SUH Shrine. It's a Catholic church commemorating People Power Revolution in 1986. The Catholic Church was an ally of pro-democracy, anti-dictatorship protesters at the time, and the Cardinal Sin was also a very well-known leader of the People Power movement. And the stones here is the picture I took from the Museum of Courage and Resistance. It's a small NGO museum. The stones were decorated by protesters who went out against the burial of former President Marcos into Heroes Cemetery. Well, their protest failed, and Marcos is now in the Heroes Cemetery. But anyway, so what happened in the Philippines? Philippines people power occurred in 1986, and there were few standardized models of transitional justice available at that time. And the new President Corazon Aquino, issued Executive Order Number 1 and created the Presidential Commission on Good Government, PCGG, for the recovery of ill-gotten wealth of the Marcos family and the cronies. Aquino's original plan was actually to assign both recovery of ill-gotten wealth and investigation for human rights abuses to one commission. But according to the memoir of the former head of PCGG, he refused the plan because he didn't want to do all the jobs. So there was a separate commission for human rights, and we can see from his memoir the two issues, human rights abuses and corruption, went separate ways out of practical concerns and not a compartmentalized perspective, like human rights is one and corruption is another. Well, the chair of this PCGG was a Yale graduate. He was a very well-networked lawyer and had lots of friends in the US. And the PCGG filed lawsuits in the US court to seize the Marcos assets in the US. And also there was the Swiss bank, the freeze of Swiss bank accounts actually um, was launched by the Swiss government first. But anyway, yeah. So it was there, the PCGG activity was very international. And also, there were class action suits by victims of abuses in the US because Marcos family fled to Hawaii after the People Power Revolution. So uh, they didn't want to, the Marcos didn't want to come to the Philippines for standing trials, so they had to go to the US. And the Hawaii court issued a verdict for damages of US $2 billion for victims. And for the next 2 decades, PCGG and claimants fought over the Swiss assets. And actually, legal battles, Marcos family versus PCGG and PCGG versus claimants are still ongoing in the US and across the globe, I think. But in 2013, a certain compromise came in the form of Republic Act 10368. It was a reparations law. So the bill was largely homegrown. The legislators that I interviewed a senator who was behind the legislation of this piece, and I asked her, "So, what was the model of your bill? Argentina, Chile?" And she said, "I don't know, maybe Japan. I think this is the first first in Asia, the reparations law." Which was not true because already Korea had reparations law, and other countries like Sri Lanka and Nepal also had reparations law. But the Philippine people is still thinking of 1986 when they pioneered the democratic transition of the third wave democracy. And anyway, this act recognized state responsibility for past human rights abuses under Marcos martial law. And the law, interestingly, recognized heroism and sacrifices of martial law victims as well. Though the terms are very interesting because usually transitional justice works, the terminology of transitional justice is very legalistic. And there is no room for heroism or sacrifice of activists, but this law did that. Anyway, one third of Swiss assets were provided as reparations for victims, and over 11,000 applicants were recognized as victims by this commission, out of the established by this law. And this also interestingly, this law included economic crimes in the category of human rights abuses, unjust or illegal takeover of a business, and confiscation of property. This was actually what happened in the Philippines during the martial law. President Marcos took a hostage of a son of a very rich businessman and just took over his business as a ransom money for the son. And these sorts of crimes are usually not included as the mandates of truth commissions or human rights trials, but the Philippines did this. And in the end, although the PCGG and the Hawaii claimants fought over the Marcos assets for 2 decades. In the end, I think anti-corruption efforts and human rights advocacy helped each other um, in creating this bill. And still in the Philippines, there is this commission, Human Rights Violations Victims Memorial Commission. And this commission will continue to engage in memorial works, including building the Memorial Museum in Metro Manila, I think in Quezon City. And the PCGG is still working to recover the Marcos assets. This was one of the paintings recovered by the PCGG in 2014. Um, Gauguin's Still Life with Idol. And this is Imelda Marcos, who is still very healthy, who outlived his husband. And this picture was also taken in 2014 um, with her art collections from around the world. Okay, now the Indonesia, which I have been working for the past 12 years. In Indonesia, the human rights abuses and corruption went separate ways. Campaigns for human rights and anti-corruption campaigns were in the hands of like experts of each area, usually lawyers and NGO activists. And these issues were treated as specialized and compartmentalized issues rather than a state of authoritarian legacies. Indonesian democracy were reborn in 1998. So at that time, already there were norms and international models out there to import. And these norms and models were introduced through direct and indirect networks. So in Indonesia, there were legislation for Human Rights Court and Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So the laws are already there, but all convictions were overturned and TRC has not been even established. So it's only the law and no implementation. This is a table I made that for the Human Rights Court, the National Commission for Human Rights in Indonesia should first uh, complete a report, and then prosecutors should start investigations. And prosecutors are not working at all. So it's all these reports that are shelved in the prosecutor's office. There are cases like East Timor, Tanjung Priok, Papua, and protesters in Jakarta, riots, activists and disappearances, Papua again, and the criminals, extrajudicial killings of criminals, communist purge, and Aceh. All the cases are just shelved. So we cannot say that nothing has been done because we have these reports. But and there were also aids to victims, like medical aid and small amounts of money, but no state acknowledgement of past wrongdoings and no state apology was issued. And there was very little recovery of assets. So this is me from 10 years, 2010, with victims of human rights abuses. These people are actually former communists who were jailed in 1965. And most of them received some small medical aids before they passed away, because most of them now are already passed away. But not full apology or reparations or anything. And this is the building in Jakarta, Granadi building. This is the only one piece of assets that the Indonesian government seized from the Suharto family. And they seized this building 2 years ago, only 2 years ago in 2018, before the presidential election. So the criminal investigation over Suharto's foundation was very carefully managed. And when the journalist of Time asked the prosecutors why this is the case, he answered, maybe the reason is if we want to investigate all of them, because he was the president, so of course many of them are connected, including us. So they didn't really want to deep further than this building. Actually, the Swiss government proposed that they would freeze the Suharto assets, but the prosecutors, so Indonesian prosecutors, failed and failed again to recover the assets. So Suharto was always sick, so he never stood trials, and only 2 persons among his cronies were convicted. Maybe it is related to the character of anti-corruption campaign around the world because they usually focus on the current issues rather than the past, but there are also other factors too. Mm. Okay, in South Korea, uh, public anger over corruption facilitated trials of former presidents. Um, there was a special committee on the corruption under the Fifth Republic, which was created by the National Assembly in 1988. Um, human rights abuses was also a part of the corruption because the notorious torture Ignaz case was covered by the committee. Gwangju Committee was created in a parallel move, and the hearings were televised. 47 people were indicted either as a follow-up measure to the special committees or as a part of the another case, Saemaung-undong case, which involved the Chun Doo-hwan's brother. At that time, in 1990, case was closed with reparations and restoration of very few people. It was the shot from in the mid 1990s, trials of former president finally began, but it was only after a new scandal revealing a president's role's hidden assets. So the trials were about authoritarian legacies as a whole from its beginning to abuses of power, the treason and coup, massacre, and also corruption. There was no reference to international human rights norms and very few international networks mobilized for the campaign. Human rights and corruption parted ways after the trials. Truth seeking and rehabilitation for different groups of victims and 20 plus official bodies and also TRC Korea, reparations, state apology. Koreans have very unique interpretations of human rights terminology too. This is a part of the table I made of Korean transitional justice for an Indonesian NGO, which they never published for more than 1 year. I think this was the heydays of Korean transitional justice, the President Roh Moo-hyun's period administrations, the TRCK, which investigated wartime civilian massacres and retrial of those people who were wrongfully prosecuted under the past authoritarian regimes, reparations and compensations, and Roh Moo-hyun's apologies for victims of state abuses, and also memorial works like Jeju April 3rd Peace Park began. And the government widened the scope of truth seeking into the marginalized people like victimized Hansen's disease patients, and etc. So finally, conclusions. So my conclusions are not that ambitious. I just wanted to show that human rights and corruptions are not ultimately conflicting, although the two can compete in specific situations. Early democratizers like the Philippines and South Korea developed homegrown models of justice, which saw human rights and corruption as related issues. So in the Philippines, anti-kleptocracy work of the PCGG led to reparations law, and in South Korea, the trials of former presidents were made possible by the corruption scandal. On the other hand, Indonesia saw human rights and corruption as two specialized categories of crimes, and there no state apology or recognition of abuses followed. Well, I don't want to put this as success versus failure because basically the three countries share similar characteristics of transitional justice, like victim-oriented and very few prosecutions, etc. And also other factors like length of the regime or mode of transition mattered in deciding the course of transitional justice. But I just wanted to highlight this one aspect of transitional justice, which is how the human rights and corruption were linked or integrated. Thank you for listening. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Sa. So now I'd like to open the floor and then collect some questions. I haven't seen any questions comes up to this group chat panel. So please feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions um, from her presentations.
Hello.
Hello. May I ask you some questions, or do I need to leave a chat
Uh,
message?
yes, you can speak, Heejin Lee.
Oh, okay. Hello. Thank you for your good presentation. And I have question. You just earlier page you mentioned about corruption has delegitimate. I don't know how to read it. Delegitimization effects. I am not a political science major, so could you explain more about that page? Yes, I don't know how to spell it. It sounded. Could
Yeah,
you explain about this? Yes.
yeah, it's just
Is
that
that actually?
people are more concerned. The public is more concerned with corruption than human rights abuses. So if it is revealed that, for example, President Pinochet of Chile tortured the opposition activists, people were not so actually angry. You know, they think it just happens to a few opposition activists. But when it was revealed that President Pinochet stole a lot of money from the government, the public as a whole was very angry. So the character of these issues are different. So human rights abuses have a group of victims who have a very serious stake in going with this to making progress with the transitional justice. Corruption does not have a small group or designated group of victims. So the whole country is a victim, right? So it's about the different characters of two issues. So maybe with human rights abuses, we can get a very sustained movement for transitional justice. But with the corruption, we can see the more, I don't know, wide public, the anger from the wide public who may not be interested in the fate of opposition activists or civilians in war zones. So the delegitimization effects is over the past authoritarian regime.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you
we
for
have
the
one
question.
question from Camilla. So Camilla, can you speak or you rather remain silent and for us to read your question? Camilla? Okay, I guess, okay, her microphone doesn't work. So here is a question. So could you please clarify what kind of reparations would the people who suffered from the human rights abuses expect to receive? So if you have interviewed any of them, have you seen any comments or ideas from them? What kind of reparations they would accept or satisfactory?
Well, it's a difficult issue, you know, what kind of reparations. There are two different sorts of reparations. The first is monetary reparations, which is of course money. And the second is non-monetary reparations, which are like stuff like this Freedom Memorial Museum, you know, memorial reparations, collective reparations. Well, but when I interviewed people, like when I interviewed the former communists who live in their uh, shared house, they answered, "Oh, we don't need any monetary reparations. You know, we just need some recognition from the government that they did this wrong to us." So I think it depends, but most of the people would not really reject monetary reparations, but still maybe it's not the core of reparations, because reparations and compensation are different. So the meaning attached to reparations is that the state did some wrongs and they want to repair the wrongs by giving these reparations, whether it's monetary or non-monetary. Is it enough or?
Okay. So Camilla, do you have any follow-up questions? So I think we should give her some time to think over. So let me just read out the second question. So actually Dimitri has two questions. To what extent organizations that manage trials of presidents or former presidents are transparent and independent? And is there any correlation between efficiency of these organizations and the resistance of corruption officials? Because they might be pushed to leave their office.
Yeah, interesting question. I think the PCGG in the Philippines and the Judiciary and Prosecutor's Office in South Korea were largely trusted by the Korean public, right? So yeah, their legitimacy was not very much doubted. In Indonesia, the judiciary had such a low trust, so they built a separate system of human rights court, which included people from outside the from like NGO workers and lawyers, and also the different prosecutors team and etc. But in the end, this separate human rights court system also failed to create the satisfactory results for the public or for the victims or actually anybody, because all human rights convictions were overturned, cancelled in Indonesia. So officially there is no perpetrator of human rights abuses now. And yeah, so I think the public's belief in these institutions, whether they are transparent or independent, and also how these institutions actually work, have lots to do with the transitional justice. And many people say in Indonesia, the real problem is the weak prosecutors and politicized prosecutors office and politicized judiciary, weak judiciary. Yeah, I think there is a grain of truth in that also statement.
Okay. So I think there is more questions following. So Maya, so do you want to talk to?
Hello.
Yes,
Thank
Maya.
you for your lecture. My question is that recently I heard about the case when one country, I don't know which country it was, but it had to pay debt due to their winning in their war of independence to France, I think. And as they won their independence, it wasn't. Can we say that their human rights were like not broken, but can we say that they were martial law victims? Not France, but this country. As I think it correlates to your topic, and I'm just very curious. It open thinking.
Okay, thank you for your question first. And I'm not sure whether this makes an answer, but yeah, just like transitional justice over authoritarian regimes, there is also transitional justice over colonial rule and human rights abuses during colonial rule. So in Indonesia also, this recently there were a few rulings in the Netherlands for the victims of the independence war in 1946, 1947, 1948, because there were the anti-colonial struggle in Indonesia was very violent at that time, and there were freedom fighters versus in the Netherlands soldiers, and there were civilian killings and etc. In the 1970s, in the 1980s, the Netherlands, the Dutch government and NGOs in the Netherlands always blame the Indonesian government for their human rights abuses during the Suharto dictatorship, but they didn't do anything about their own colonial wrongs of the 1940s. And now they made some progress internally, the Dutch people, and they began to give reparations to victims and the families of victims of their own massacres in Indonesia. And I hope this positively influences the perception on transitional justice in Indonesia itself as well.
Thank you
Does it
very
make
much.
Thank you. And about the second question of Mr. Dimitri Besedin, any correlation between the efficiency of these organizations and the resistance of corrupt officials to leave their cabinets? Well, the corrupt officials always resist to leave the cabinets, and in all the three countries, there were very few lustrations or purges of the corrupt officials or officials who perpetrated human rights abuses. So the soldiers who were convicted in the trials were even now promoted in Indonesia, for example. So yeah, there is very little aspect of this, the lustration or purge, compared to former communist countries like in Eastern Europe, where lustration occurred on a larger scale.
Thanks for your answer. It was very useful.
Thank you for questions.
Okay. So, any other questions? Okay, so can I ask one question? So I'm not a comparativist. I'm mainly doing international relations. But I see some similarities between the apologies between states and apologies within states. So for instance, you mentioned about the reparation and other tools of reconciliation, building commissions and revealing the truths of the past wrongdoing. So for instance, between states, it is an important factor to emphasize how do each country remember their own past. So about, for example, history textbook is obviously a big issue between Korea and Japan. So what would be the possible implication or application of this type of remembrance issue? Maybe memory politics that could be related to the topic of intrastate apologies. So for instance, government apologizes past to its own people, and how do they actually envision this type of apology in public education or public commemorations? And do you have any some examples in those three countries?
Well, memory politics is a very delicate issue and very difficult problem for me. So I'm now participating in the project, the HK Plus project, Humanities Korea project on memory and politics at Sogang University. Still very difficult. Well, anyway, one implication of memory politics on transitional justice in Indonesia, for example, is because I'm an expert of Indonesia. I always talk about Indonesia. Indonesia is always my example. So in Indonesia, there were very few memory works like this. For example, in the Philippines, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised to see lots of memorials commemorating the people power movement and also resistance and heroism and sacrifices of the people under that. And in Indonesia, there were very few memorials like that. As far as I remember, I always ask my friends, NGO activists, where are the memorials? And they'll say, oh, no, we don't have any memorials. I don't know, maybe it's a Islamic culture or, but in Aceh, it's a westernmost province of Indonesia, which just stopped their struggle for independence after the 2005 tsunami. But anyway, in Aceh, they began to build some memorials. And in Indonesia, what they tried to do with this legalistic, I'm sorry, with these legalistic norms and models were to make transitional justice happen without the internal memorial works. For example, if they just try to import the international human rights instruments and apply them to Indonesia without changing the public perception over the former authoritarian regime. There was a debate on history textbooks, but it was very brief. And now they are with the this 2012 report on 1965-1966 communist purge. Well, the serious memory struggles began, but I think in that struggle, the human rights groups lost the struggle, and because the President Jokowi was interested in giving a state apology to victims of human rights abuses, but anti-communists were very strong are very strong in Indonesia, so they always opposed the plan. So without the I don't know, a bit of memorial works and agreement on how these events can be remembered and shared by the public, legalistic transitional justice is not very promising. That's one of my conclusions, which I didn't write down here.
Okay, thank you. So anyone have any questions?
May I have one question? So, to me, so I'm a comparativist, but I have very little knowledge of the politics in Indonesia or Philippines. But so this, to me, it looks like it is about the relationship between the way of pursuing transitional justice and the different way of the pursuing that may produce different outcomes. So even though you avoided to say the success or failure, but but the outcomes are to some degree different. So it sounds like so when the two issues like the human rights abuses and corruption are not treated separately, then that could lead to maybe a better outcomes, maybe in terms of some pursuing transitional justice. But so I think you explained something about why that is the case. But could you a little bit clarify why the treating those issues together could be the better option for the region for the resulting the democratic regimes to pursue transitional justice?
Well, it's not, the mechanism is actually not very deep. I think it's just about making more chances for both issues to be brought about to the media or by state institutions. So, and with the corruption cases, you can have the delegitimization effects over the dictators, and that maybe can lead to human rights trials. Maybe human rights, the investigation into human rights abuses, like in Chile, there was this Pinochet effect from made after his arrest in London, right? And then the issue came to Chile, and then the prosecutors started to work harder, and there were corruption cases and also human rights abuses cases in Chile. So these are processes that are linked together. So if you have separate venues and separate, what you say, campaigns, so the chances that these issues are brought to the attention to the public or the state institutions decline, I think. So yeah. So I just admit that there is no deep mechanism over the linkage of human rights abuses and corruption. I just believe that because there are people who say corruption trials hinder, I don't know, progress of human rights abuses. I just wanted to say this is not necessarily true, that it's not corruption trials that hinder your human rights abuses cases. In South Korea, in the Philippines, for example, there are these two issues go together, and there is, I wouldn't say no problem, but there are a few problems. And yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.
May I have I have one more question? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So you talked about human rights, but to me, I just think about some types of human rights related to the corruption, maybe only like labor or possession of personal property. Or what other types of human rights abuses can be related to corruption? Like there are many types of human rights. So any examples?
Yeah, the cease of assets. The prime example of the overlapping of human rights abuses and corruption should be cases like cases like this, that takeover of a business with detention of owners or their families. But also these issues, I focus on the heads of state and their large-scale corruption, and also their responsibility for human rights abuses. But in the larger literature, the two issues are treated as violations of civil and political rights and violations of economic and social rights and human rights. And if you widen your perspective in that way, there are more ways to link these two issues. Like, for example, the South Korean Truth and Reconciliation Commission said grave violations of human rights is usually about violations of bodily integrity. So, for example, extrajudicial killings or tortures and enforced disappearances. But the Korean TRC interpreted that the lack of chances to get educated or the lack of labor rights can also be a part of human rights abuses. So it also relies on, it's up to your interpretation and or your institution's interpretations at how human rights and abuses and corruption can be linked. Does it make? I don't know. It is like 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, anyone? Any other questions? So just a few some clarification question from myself. So you're talking about two issues here. One is human rights abuse and the other one is corruption. And in terms of this framework of a transitional justice, in my understanding, you argue that, well, these two issues could be go side by side. It doesn't actually hurt. It is not necessarily in a trade-off relationship in terms of achieving this transitional justice. Um, so that being said, if we talk about reconciliation process, well, well, there are some theoretical debates, to my understanding, whether or not reconciliation itself is transitional justice or part of a justice or a subset of justice and so on. So I will leave that to your own decision, on your own perspective. I want to hear about it too. So when we talk about the political reconciliation or even political forgiveness, what would be easier between either going side by side these two issues together, or dealing with corruption is easier than dealing with human rights abuses? And is it any factors that could be affecting, or is it contingent to political context and so on?
I'm not sure whether I got the question, your question right. About reconciliation is usually about post-conflict justice, right? Rather than post-authoritarian justice. And if this is related to post-authoritarian justice, reconciliation is between groups, right? So in Indonesia, for example, reconciliation can occur between former communists and Islamic movements, because many of the members of Islamic movements were mobilized for the killings of communists back in 1965, 1966. So yeah, reconciliation can occur like that, but I'm not sure whether this reconciliation and forgiveness can be applied to the issue of corruption. I'm not sure, because yeah, it's about the perpetrators, so a small group of perpetrators and the whole country. So I think if corruption is forgotten, is usually is out of convenience rather than intention for reconciliation or forgiveness or anything. Because, well, for reconciliation, usually you do truth seeking first. Some truth seeking over the conflict or human rights abuses, and then reconciliation comes. But I don't know if we already investigated corruption cases and do not put the perpetrators on trial. Maybe it's because of the, I don't know, limits of state or something like that, the legal technical problems, and yeah, not for forgiveness or reconciliation or anything. But well, there is, yeah, a tendency of the former Korean government administrations that did not chase after John President John's hidden assets very eagerly. Maybe there was some intention for reconciliation between them and the former authoritarian regime. I think, yeah, it's very novel to put forgiveness, reconciliation, and corruption. I haven't actually thought very carefully about that, and thank you for the good question.
Okay. So I think it's someone raised hand. Dimitri, do you have any questions? No, it's not you. Okay. Okay, so any other questions? I think we have used almost the allocated time. So because it's already past 10 p.m. in South Korea. So if you have any questions, this is the last time you can do. Okay, so I have to conclude today's session then. Okay, so again, Dr. So, thank you very much for sharing your time. I know it's very late in Korea now, and also sharing your interesting research about this past accounts of authoritarian regimes. So do you want to say anything, Professor Park? No? Okay, so just for the record, I'm going to post the recordings of today's seminar for those who are not able to participate today on live. So please feel free to come back to the recordings and then see what has been discussed. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And then I hope we will see you soon again with another seminar series. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. 감사합니다. 스파 스파.